Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Mindset Shift podcast, the podcast to collaborate, share ideas and practices on human behaviors, communications, and leadership. Today, we got David Tindell with us. I met David in Negotiation Practice Community, where he was hosting or still hosting the Among Us gamification process to supercharge your communication skills and negotiation skills. And since then, we've been talking, and David is a fascinating guy, from winning to multiple national awards for web design, robotics, extemporaneous speech, social engineering expert. I mean, the list just goes on and on. David, welcome. Please take it away.
Thank
Tell
you.
us a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you for having me. Briefly, what happened is I've always had a passion for learning, and in school, if I found things fascinating, I would just sit there and just eat it up. Love tech. It's something that I could do, even being disabled, that I was actually had a skill at, and so because of that, I got really, really good at it. My first computer broke every day, and you get real good at fixing things when it breaks all the time. So from that, I was able to utilize that knowledge and grow. And I've always had kind of a knack for public speaking. And so that's how I got the awards for extemporaneous speech. And that kind of manifested into the robotics and CAD. And then I did an award, and I didn't even plan on doing any sort of awards for the website. I just designed the website because it was the newest thing to do. And the Wall Street Journal reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're going to give you an award for this." And I mean, I built that thing on Netscape Navigator Gold. That should tell everybody how old I am. That is old. I mean, I did it with a 56K US robotics modem. So from then, went to 2 different schools and worked at Office Depot. I had a problem though, is in America at the time, couldn't get medical insurance. And so I was paying for everything out of pocket. And every time I went to go get medical insurance, they all said, "Your stuff's from birth, pre-existing condition, sorry." And it's unfortunate, but I was working and it was costing me more to work than it would just to draw government assistance. And it broke my heart, but I'm like, that's just the way it is. Well, then the law changed, and that it said that insurance companies could no longer deny pre-existing conditions. And I hated having to depend on anybody else, so I immediately opened up my business. And came from a tech background, so I did tech repair and all that stuff. But the problem is even though in my area, I had a very unique offering and superior certifications, and as far as what I saw, couldn't sell my product. Of course, I'm from the South, and whenever you're from the South, it's not, "Are you good at this?" It's, "Did you go to school with my pappy, and were you there at the barbecue last Thursday, and you know what happened with Mary Ann?" And if you don't know that stuff, you don't get the sale. And so I was like, well, what do I do? And then HubSpot reached out to me to be a partner, and they said, "Well, you've already got web skills, and obviously you've got speaking skills." Well, back then, they said all these things like SEO and sales and web design, they've all just been packaged under one thing. Now they call it a digital marketing agency. And so I was like, that's not a bad idea. Nobody's marrying IT business management and repair with digital marketing, but we always get asked because
And how long ago was that?
Oh,
What's the timeline?
yeah, that was like 13 years ago now. Yeah. And what's interesting is, and this kind of goes into the human behavior thing, is when people are very funny. So what happens is whenever I go in to do, say, a computer repair, people automatically correlate that with, I'm supposed to have knowledge on any sort of electronic device from that point, which is inaccurate. That would be like saying, "Oh, you changed the tires on my car, you must be able to fix every car on the planet." Well, there's no way. They're all very different animals. It's no way. But by adding that digital marketing with it, it allowed me to expand my offering and provide a lot more. And then to cap it off, while I was at the first inbound conference, somebody had, I was talking about sales training, and somebody mentioned Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference. And I was like, it's okay, I'll read that book. And it's a great book. Love the book. And they offer a lot of these classes for a pretty good amount where you actually go sit down and work with Chris and whatnot. And travel is difficult for me. So I kept hounding the Black Swan group, and Chris is like, you need to have an online at your own pace course. This is everybody's doing this. Why are you not doing this? Well, they finally did it. So I bought it, went through it, and did the master class right after. And it's been incredibly interesting to me. I've been studying negotiation and certifying and going through all this. It's been a heck of a journey. And I really love the aspects of it that you learn. I've learned more about what it is about being a human and how they end up getting there in the more with learning negotiation than I have anything else. It's been really interesting because you learn all the
Wow.
stuff behind them.
Yeah, it's fascinating to seeing the perspective of a hostage negotiator specialist, and it's been really revealing that the psychology is kind of deep, and at the same time is so simple, right? Because we it doesn't matter if we a hostage taker, hostage negotiator, or we just selling things on the market. The principles apply.
Right.
David, I'd like to dive into your processes and how did you combine technology and your negotiation techniques and skills how did you come up with the idea to use one of the modern games, Among Us, to facilitate these training sessions to improve the negotiation skills?
Well, what I noticed first is that whenever somebody's learning through whatever process, in this case, we'll talk about negotiation. Like, so we'll directly say, like the Chris Voss methods, for example. So what ends up happening is people go through a few stages. The first one is they'll read it, and then they'll go okay, but they don't have a lot of confidence in their ability. So what they'll end up doing is and there's nothing wrong with this, is they will be heavily reliant on just repeating the scripts that are in the book, the key phrases. And they're focused on memorizing those scripts. There's nothing wrong with that, but you have to understand when you do that is those scripts are there just so that way you got a starting point to leap off of, right? And so what I was noticing is my practices is after a period of time that a lot of people were too reliant on the scripts. They had a lot of theoretical knowledge, but not a lot of applied knowledge. And so I would go through several mock negotiations with people. And my favorite one that really got me to really focus on this is I was doing the 60 seconds or she dies drill. And I said, I need a vehicle now. And the person said, well, it sounds like you're really frustrated. And in the back of my head, I'm just screaming because there's so much data there. And all they kept saying is, it seems like, it sounds like, it seems like, and I'm intentionally throwing all this data out there so they'll use it, and they didn't use it. They just kept reflecting on it. So I was like, there's gotta be something I can do, because to get good at this stuff, you have to have consequences. But I didn't want, because you have to actually use it. And I needed consequences, but I didn't want consequences that would hurt somebody's actual life. Right. And it's very difficult to come up with a scenario. And then I thought, well, video games or games in general provide that catalyst because nobody likes to lose and everybody will get involved with it. And so I was like, what can I do? And then I've played Among Us for a while, and I had actually started playing Among Us because the first time I played it, I'm like, oh, goody, I get to practice my negotiation stuff here. Because I saw the way it is, and if you're not familiar with the game, the premise is you have a crew. One of you is an imposter that looks identical to everybody else. Their job is to either wreck the ship or kill everybody. And the other people's job is to either expose the imposter or finish their task. And whenever somebody comes across something or initiates a meeting, that's where your negotiation takes place. Is because to do anything in the game, you have to have majority vote. And so obviously the imposter is going to be trying to divert attention and getting people to vote their way to throw out somebody else, whereas everybody else is trying to not only figure out who the actual imposter is, but get them thrown out of the ship. And I'm like, well, this is a great opportunity because now there are consequences. And so, like, let's say I'm not the imposter. Not only do I have to actually use the data that's there and provided, but I have to convince, say, 9 other people to throw Bob out because I think Bob's the imposter. So I have to convince them not only that Bob is the imposter, but they need to vote with me so I'll win the game. Or vice versa. Is like if I'm the imposter, I've got to convince 9 other people that Bob's the imposter, not me, or various other techniques. And I'm like, well, this is wonderful. This is exactly what I wanted to do because now I've got a live scenario with consequences. It's not going to screw up anybody's life. And it's fun. And I've had people, whenever I ran the class or been in groups, I've had people from age 70 all the way to age 12. And what's frightening is generally the 12-year-olds beat the older people that are practice negotiators. And the only reason is because they had to learn and they've never taken negotiation practice, but they played this game so much that they've actually learned negotiation skills on their own without having to read the book and stuff. And it's the mind of a child is really amazing how they're able to do that. But yeah, that's how I ended up to it. And then I took it once I, saw that, I was able to offer some training with it. And if you're able to remove your ego from it and actually appreciate, that's one thing that I always try to tell people is if something doesn't work, it's better not to get angry or get offended, but figure out why it didn't work, because that's a gift. Now you've got something that you can improve on. It's like I tell people whenever I do marketing, if somebody leaves a negative review on their business, the worst thing you can do as a business owner is to get upset about it and lash out at them and everything. And they don't understand why. I explain it like this. I go, most people, if they go into your business and they're unhappy with your business, because we live in a global economy now. For example, if you sold t-shirts and you lived in my town and I didn't like the way you did t-shirts, I can buy them from a kid in Malaysia for probably $5 less and get it delivered all to my door, and I never even have to put on pants. It's an amazing world. Now, with that said, is because we live and have so many options, if I go into your restaurant, your business or whatnot, and I have a bad time, odds are I won't say anything. I just won't ever go back to your business. I'll tell my friends, but I'm not going to complain online or anything because that requires time and effort from me. Now, if somebody actually takes the time and effort to leave you a negative review, that's a gift. So what you can do with that, and this, like, for example, with the restaurant scenario, what I've done is I will say, instead of getting mad, let's do this. So you message that person privately that left you the negative review, and you go, you know what? Thank you for being so generous to let me know something I didn't know about my business. I appreciate you taking the time to tell me this. Now, let me repay you in kind. I need somebody to make sure that this is fixed. And you seem like the individual that you care enough to do it. So let me do this. Let me pay for your next 3 meals. And over the next 60 days, you've got to go 3 separate times, not back to back, obviously, and spread it out. But you pay for your meal, whatever it is. You take a screenshot of the check and send it to me, and I will deposit your money in your PayPal account within 24 hours each time. Now, after the 3rd visit, I want you to go back. And if I've improved on things, you have to change your review. And most of them will be like, yeah, sure, thank you, that's awesome. Now, here's the deal with that, is at the end of the that 4th visit where now it's ride or die, either I fix things or not. Normally things are a lot better. And that person not only sees that you've improved, but you've made them feel important and relevant and unique because you cater to them and you've taken the time to address the problem and fix it. So not only have you addressed this problem that you didn't know you have, but now this individual sees that you fixed it and now will go around and tell everybody else what a wonderful business owner you are. They will advertise your business forever, telling them this person you need to go see. And so this one
100%,
bad
Ed.
review,
This is
yeah.
something fascinating, and this is something I've used in with my clients too, is that the negative reviews, because they get a lot of attention. So it is a free marketing in a sense, because now you get a chance to reply in a way that will benefit you, that everyone else will see. And how is it that you're handling this negative review? Now, negativity bias is strong. I mean, people go and buy just, on reviews, nothing else. Like if they see something they like, they go to reviews and they look at 3-4 stars reviews and make conclusions. So how you respond to these reviews perhaps is even more important than 5-star reviews in essence. And now, as you're recruiting these people to do the work for you in a sense, because now they becoming your raving fans, they helping you with business at a very little cost, because that now they're involved in the process, now that they are spending time, energy, and efforts and actually helping you. And yes, you're paying for the meals, but at the same time, once the process is done, you fixed your business at the very little cost. I mean, you get a raving fan. It's just a win-win scenario for a lot of reasons. David, I would like to dive in a little bit into the negotiations and gamification of the process. What I noticed with mock negotiation practices, and when I'm hosting sessions and when I'm attending this practices, is that people, even though the environment is relatively safe, there is no dangers. This is the environment when you learn, when you practice, when you get feedback. People get very anxious. They get overwhelmed, worried. They feel this stress coming up as soon as they need to engage with the mock negotiation scenario, and a lot of things pop out. And this is what happens. People tend to fall back on the scripts, on something that they memorize, something that they think is going to work. When in essence, the communication is not about words, it's more about the tone of voice, body language, and the force with which you communicate certain ideas. And that's the kind of a problem that I think maybe not so much of a problem, but realizations that a lot of people are coming to, is that emotional intelligence is extremely important in order for you to progress and improve your communication skills. So how from your perspective, how does gamification process help people relax and get into the learning mode in order for them to improve faster?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that in the scenario that I provided that it helps them to relax, because that's not accurate. In the scenario that I provide, it is intentionally designed to make them uncomfortable. And let me expand a little bit on that. This is important. So, like, let's say they were doing a mock negotiation and not in my Among Us thing. You've got a couple things going on. First off, they know the other person, which also means they're also worried about judgments and feelings. And these people are your friends, or we're all part of the same tribe. And so they want to appear a certain way. So they're worried about their ego and their appearance and being judged. And the problem with that is that most people, whenever they go into a negotiation, very rarely do they have a lot of forewarning. And so most negotiations are very impromptu and are generally uncomfortable at first, unless you've learned how to manage your negotiations or whatnot. So the whole process I went through with Among Us, it is specific, as I tell them up front, is this is intended to be difficult. It is intended to challenge you. It is intended to make you uncomfortable. And the reason is if you don't train like you actually negotiate, then it's not really a benefit. So, like, for example, during the Among Us thing, one person found this website to where, hey, you can track everything that happened in the game and it'll make it easier for you. And I made the comment, I was like, you can use that if you want to, but let me ask you a question. He goes, yeah. And I'm like, when you're in a negotiation with somebody, do you pull out a notebook and start taking notes right there in front of them? And they go, no. And I'm like, okay. the idea with the gamification is to help you practice as close to your real world scenario as you can without consequences. So if you're not doing it in the real world, why would you do it here? And they go, oh, and then the other part of that too is I explained to them too about you have to, for this to work, you have to check your ego at the door. And that's one of the other problems with doing mock negotiations is a lot of people, because they've got that tribal thing in the friendship and they want to maintain appearance or whatnot. And nobody likes to be, no, I like, for example, let's say me and you were negotiating. I don't want to be the bad person to tell you you screwed up, because I don't want to seem like a know-it-all or an asshole or anything like that. And I also value our friendship and our camaraderie, so I'm not going to speak ill of you if I have any sense of social grace at all. Well, that's not beneficial to you, because now you're not getting any honest feedback, right? And so at this thing, I tell them, I'm like, look, this is a competition up front. If somebody says you didn't do something right, don't get insulted by it. And damn sure don't feel restricted on telling somebody they didn't do something right. You have to tell them, and they have to know that. They've got to accept it and they've got to use it. Otherwise, this is not useful at all. And so and this is how they do get comfortable, is once they get past that concern of violating the social contract that we've all developed of, I can't say anything bad about you and you can't say anything bad about me, and we're just all skating on this thin ice that isn't really helping out anybody. Once you crack that ice and we're all just flailing in the water, drowning, and that's where you get to the real part of it. And that's when you can start really getting into that. And once you've cracked that ice, even though they are uncomfortable, they gain a new sense of comfort because they're not restricted anymore. So now they're not constricted, and so they're able to actually do help and do negotiate and really work with this stuff. And it's provided dividends quite a bit. I mean, very short amounts of time.
Fascinating, because it's all about stress management. I mean, if you're stressed,
Correct.
anxious, worried, just overwhelmed, the amount of information you could gather is severely limited, and your working memory is restricted. Your cognitive abilities
Correct.
are just shutting down left and right the more you're overwhelmed.
Correct.
So in essence, the more you can manage your state, the more you can relax in the moment and be open to the moment that is unfolding in front of you, the better negotiator you could become, the better practice you could have, the more lessons you can get out of the practice or of any negotiation. So the thing about the gamification, and it seems to be kind of the main topic here, is the game makes you relax in a sense. It doesn't mean that you're not stressed. You're stressed to a certain level, but you're not overwhelmed per se. And combining game with the negotiation practices seems to help people understand that there are different contexts to negotiations, there are different environments, and provide this different environment where you're going to fail. It's a game, right? You're going to succeed, and there is a learning curve involved. And now, because of you choose a framework of negotiations, you get to practice certain tools or certain aspects of high impact communication that will propel you forward. This is kind of the original question. So what is your experience in terms of stress management and gamification? How does it help people, grasp this idea that negotiation is sort of a dance, it's sort of a game in itself? When you are the best state of mind to approach negotiation, at least from my perspective, is a state of genuine curiosity. It's when you feel sort of a playful, when you're interested in what's going to happen next, when you feel kind of respected, valued, and that's what the values that you project. And then the doors are opening up for you and the information flows and you become curious. So what does it all mean? How does it all help us move things forward? So this is the kind of a states of mind that open you up for learning, open not only yourself but your counterpart to learning, to to, structure your negotiations, structure your business deals, your relationship in a more productive way. And taking it from the perspective of gamifications, what do you think is the biggest? And you already said that this is you have to leave your ego in check. So how much of an ego people bring to the table when they are going to the practice sessions in a game scenario?
Well, now that's interesting to kind of bring back what you was saying is one of the things that I do when playing the game, because of my experience with NLP and philosophy and psychology, is it helps them recognize not only their own emotions that they're feeling, but the other emotions that the people that they're negotiating with. And in NLP, they refer to emotions as states. They're interchangeable words. And one of the things that
I'm sorry, Dave, before you dive in, can you explain a little bit for people who may not know what NLP is? What is it?
Forgive me. So NLP is an acronym for neuro linguistic programming. And what it is it was originally a science. Well, I don't want to say science at that time. It was originally a method of communication that, for lack of a better word, it was a shortcut to speaking the language of the brain. And so what they were able to figure out is through certain mannerisms, certain language, certain tones, certain behaviors, that you were able to utilize this structure of communication to not only identify what's going on with you and other people, but to, for lack of a better word, manipulate and change that in both you and them. And so, like, for example, there are things like some instructors like yourself have utilized as far as stress management, doing things like tapping in certain meridian lines to adjust the energy or relax themselves so that way they can be in a more curious and relaxed state. And so with NLP, there are several mechanisms and things that at the time when it was developed were very anecdotal. But what's really cool now is with the success of people like Daniel Goldman and his emotional intelligence and his social intelligence, is they found through doing things like MRIs and CAT scans and CT scans that, believe it or not, a lot of the things that were originally discovered in NLP were not anecdotal, that they've actually got science behind them. And there's actual studies that you can read. And what's great is NLP was designed in the 80s. It's a long time ago. And now we're just finding through the invent of technology that all of that stuff is valid because of all these reasons. One of the things that's valid, okay, a great example to illustrate this. So one of the things that they focus on in NLP is eye contact, right? And so we'll do a dating scenario. So let's say a adult male, relatively attractive guy looks across the room and he catches the eye of a woman and she thinks he's attractive, and I maintain eye contact for roughly 5 seconds. And I don't mean like just a glance. I mean intent eye contact. What they've actually found out about that in NLP, they said that was a great way to provide an opportunity for you to initiate a conversation because now they're interested because you've made a bond with them. That's how they worded it in the 80s. Today, what they've actually found out is whenever that exchange happens, that there are chemicals released in the female's brain that actually make them happy and interested because of this dump of serotonin and oxytocin, that now their chemistry changes. And that's what actually makes them more receptive to actually having that conversation. And for lack of a better word, inviting this pure stranger and dropping their guard over to talk to them. And so that would just be an example of how the old explanations of NLP have been validated by science today. But basically, it's just a use of sight, taste, such, language, tone to cause certain or help facilitate certain changes in the other person. Everybody's experienced it. I'll give you a great example. Have you ever walked into a room and a certain smell is kicked in a memory? That's NLP. Have you ever worked out and while you're at the gym listening to your favorite music, and so that way you work out harder? That's NLP. And it's making your, for lack of a better word, it is things that can help alter your state. So like, for example, when you're at the gym and you're listening to your music while you're doing the bench press or the weightlifting, that music is helping your body get into a state of flow. So that way you perform better.
Yeah, so it occurs to me in 80s where this has, NLP has been put together through observations. They were able to identify certain things that influence our behavior, and they were able to categorize it, put it on shelves, and actually teach this to people, to make people aware that this dynamic is actually happening, and the best of us are using it to the advantage. So whether it's a negotiation, whether it's just a personal motivation, you could use some of the tools that NLP found and developed to help yourself, to help people around you, to to come to terms a bit easier.
Yeah. For example, you brought up dealing with getting to a relaxed state in negotiations. One of the mistakes that I've noticed that beginners make whenever they get uncomfortable, get into a negotiation, is they try to suppress their feelings. And that's inaccurate, because if you try to suppress it, eventually it's going to pop, it's going to burst, and it will come out in a very exaggerated way. Like, for example, let's say you're in an airplane and behind you there is a small child kicking your seat, and the whole time you're sitting there for an hour and you're just sitting there going, it's just a kid, everything's gonna be fine. After an hour and a half, you suddenly get up and start shouting at this kid to stop kicking your seat. Okay, whereas if you had just recognized, this is bothering me, when the child started the behavior, get up and calmly explain, this is not what adults do, please stop it, and talk to him like a reasonable person, it would not have expanded into this horrible explosion to where now everybody on the plane is looking at you yelling at some child for something that they didn't even see.
You brought up something interesting. This is a good distinction between reaction and response. So whenever we suppressing our emotions, we're introducing resistance. So there is another emotion in effect, like you're trying to resist blowing up, which in this case actually produces even two responses in you, negative responses. And eventually when you are not able to resist it any longer, you blow up, and that's a reaction. Now, the adult response would be, okay, I see that there is a certain stressor that makes me feel this way. It's making me feel this way. What is it that I can do to help, get rid of the stressor, or, something that could be done to alleviate the pain that I'm feeling, or the pain that there's there. And that's the adult response. That's the emotionally attuned response to the situation, where you approaching the situation rationally, logically, and you thinking it out before you're acting, where the reaction will be just a knee-jerk reaction to the situation, with the you kind of attacking the stressor with the maximum level of intensity, almost maximum level of intensity. And the good practice actually to implement is to defend yourself with the minimum possible effort. And again, this response, when you're turning to the kid and explaining the situation, and that's, this is what's happening, that's not what adults do, that's the minimum level of defense you can muster in order to help understand the situation with the other person, and come to some sort of terms, negotiate with that person on the solution, possible solution, to make it more comfortable for everyone.
No, not only that, but as in Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, one of the things that he discusses is, and I'm oversimplifying, and he does in the book too, just to make it easier for everybody to understand, is that everybody has two essential brains. You've got the reptilian instinctive brain, where That's like, oh, that's hot, don't want to touch it. And then you got the other part of your brain that is the thinker, the one that does the balancing your checkbook or putting together puzzles or that sort of thing. And the problem is that people make 80 to 90% of all their decisions with that reptilian instinctual brain. And there is a constant desire of your brain to do that because we are overwhelmed with stimuli. For example, I've used this before. If your brain had to actually individually deal with all the stimuli around you all the time, you would get nothing done. For example, I go outside and there's the wind blowing and there are hundreds of thousands of leaves in that tree. Well, each one of those individual leaves are blowing in a different angle and pitch and weight. If I have to sit there and I am looking at that and trying to calculate and monitor each one of those leaves, I would just lock up and just pass out from overwhelming of information. So instead, what my brain goes is it simplifies it and goes, oh, the tree is blowing in the wind, instead of leave 1,463 is blowing at a 45-degree angle and so on and so forth. So with that, with the need to simplify and to do this, we have to avoid, unfortunately, a lot of those things cause bias, unfortunately. And also too, in the higher the unrecognized, and this is important, the higher the unrecognized emotional state that you're in, the higher the chance it will be, because of the way that we've evolved, that you will make your decisions and actions with the reptile side of your brain as opposed to the logical and rational side of your brain. For example, most people, whenever they get convicted of a crime, will be in front of the court begging for, for mercy, but they'll actually say, this isn't who I am. I don't normally do this, and I can't believe I did this. Now, granted, you do have some people that are trying to game the system, granted, but they're not actually lying when they say that. Most crime is committed whenever somebody is in high emotions and they're not honestly thinking with the logical part of the brain. If they were, they would think, okay, I broke the law. I'm going to lose most of my rights. I'm going to be in a dank, dark cell, and my family will probably not talk to me anymore. I'm going to lose my house and all my possessions. I won't be able to play PlayStation anymore. Won't be able to go out with my friends. If you're thinking logically, no one would ever commit a crime because they're thinking logically. The problem is that the more you don't recognize your emotions in you, and the stress continually causes that explosion, just like you yelling at the child, the higher, more likely chance it is that you're going to do something not proportional to what's actually going on. And so whenever I do the Among Us training or any sort of negotiation training, I tell people, you don't suppress, you recognize. And NLP, like I said, they refer to emotions as state. And so, for example, if you are afraid, the first step in coping with it is to acknowledge, I am afraid. And then learning how to properly deal with that and actually deal with it up front, so where it doesn't become a debilitating thing. So like, for example, let's say you're going to a carnival ride and you've got a fear of heights, right? And you see all these other people getting on this ride and they're doing it fine, and you talk to the person and their safety measure and all this stuff. And if you don't acknowledge that you're afraid and your significant other's like, I want to go on the ride, your constriction could get so violent that you end up having an argument with your significant other and you get transfixed and don't actually go on the ride, but you just shut down. You just shut down right there in front of it. Instead of you realize, okay, I'm afraid. Is that rational? What am I afraid of? What's the likelihood that's going to happen? And you start processing that through when you're like, I could probably do this. This isn't so bad. And then you go through and you have a good time and you didn't blow it up or yell at anybody and have a bad thing. But you have to be able, the first part of this is have to be able to recognize the state that you're in before you can work with that state to change it into something positive.
Yeah, so it seems to me describing a certain process that people could implement in order to take control of the psyche, of the emotional states, and produce the response rather than reaction to the situation.
Correct.
And of course, the first and the most important thing is to become self-aware. Like self-awareness or awareness is the key. You know, there is this expression, the good stated problem is half solved problem, right? So 50% of the solution is hidden in the recognition of the problem or defining the problem per se. So once we become aware, let's say that's a great example. You're going to the carnival and you're going to the ride and it makes you feel really uncomfortable. So what is the process that people can go through? How do they take control of the emotional reaction, calm themselves down in order to enjoy themselves more?
Well, the first trick is you got to slow things down, okay, in yourself and the situation. Whenever you're arguing with somebody, the first thing you want to do is similar, slow it down. Why is that? Okay, well, because the faster things go, the more likely it is that you're going to think with that reptile part of the brain that's biased. Okay, and we've already determined that while we did need it when we were in the caves and didn't have time to know that was a saber-toothed kitty that's going to eat me, I needed to know I need to stay away from that. I can identify what that is later. So that was useful then, but less so now because we're not really hunted by saber-toothed kitties anymore. So what the first step you have to do is slow down, and you've got to recognize it. Okay. Now, once you've slowed things down and you started recognizing it, then you're starting to switch to that thinker part of your brain. And that's when you can start asking rational questions. So, like, for example, most psychologists will say, if you can ask yourself, am I crazy? You're not crazy, because you've actually stopped and asked yourself, right? It's much the same with your emotions. If you can stop and go, is this rational? And process it through and justify it. Now, with that said, I am not suggesting anybody out there in the heat of a moment where it is life threatening, stop and go, I wonder if that bullet's going to hurt me. Don't do that. Okay. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. What I'm suggesting is in an environment that allows you to do this, where it's not life threatening, the first thing you want to do is slow down and recognize. And then once you recognize it, then you start asking rational questions to justify it. Okay. Is this rational? What is the cause behind it? And this is one of the things too that we cover in NLP that I think is vastly important, that everybody should learn right off the bat. In NLP, they say that causes are more important than behaviors. Okay. And one of the things I learned in martial arts that I always tell people is fix the problem, not the blame. Okay. Is find whatever screwed up and fix that. We can worry about blaming people later. Okay. And so what that means is people in general are not totally good or totally evil, or whatever perspective you have on that. It's they do things that we may or may not agree with. Okay. And that leads to certain actions and behaviors. So what we have to do is find the root cause of why they do that. And then you can figure out, okay, once I figured out the root cause, then that gives me something to work with to be able to make that emotion or state malleable now. So for example, let's say I had a fear of water. Okay. Why do I have a fear of water? Well, maybe whenever you were 7 years old, you were on a little floaty device and your older brother knocked it over and you fell in the water and you felt like you were drowning. And then your mother or your dad came and picked you up and they set you outside. And then you're like, oh my God, now I'm going to drown. Every time I go in water, I got to worry about somebody knocking over my thing and now I'm going to drown. Okay, well, that was fine when you were 7, but how high was the water? Right? I mean, now you were in a kiddie pool. And so at any rate, once you recognize that's why you're afraid, then you can go, okay, what's the likelihood now as an adult that if I'm in 5 foot of water, that somebody knocking over my raft is going to cause me to drown? Oh, well, probably that's not very likely. So then I have
Well,
no problem
the
getting in a hot
problem
tub
is
now.
this. The problem is this, and that's what I'm saying, is that people can well recognize what happened and how they get triggered. They don't realize that there are tools and there are things you could do that are safe, to alleviate this fear, to take control of this response. And even though a lot of people realize, oh, it's my response is inadequate, like there is a much better framework I could approach it with, much better mindset, and yet there is this emotional dynamic that stops me. So what are some of the things or some of the strategies? I know, like, for example, meditation helps. I know, like, physical activity helps, and there are some other mental tools you could use in order to help you tap into your emotional states and prepare yourself for the experience that unfolding in front of you. So from the framework of NLP, what are some of the things you could do to take control of the situation once you become aware of emotions that's kind of rising up in you?
Okay, so here's a great example. In NLP, they have a technique called anchoring. And what that is you're linking a emotion or behavior with some sort of physical touch or touch that you're doing to something else, and you're linking that emotional state to that touch. So that way, whenever you bring that body movement up, it will correlate and remind you of that other thing. So for example, let's say, Pavlov's dog. Back in psychological days, that Pavlov ran this test, and he wanted to see if he could train his dog to salivate whenever he rang the bell. And he would give him treats, rang the bell, and then eventually, whenever he rang the bell, the dog started salivating, even though there was no treat there, right? Same concept. Okay. So, for example, one of the things that you could do is, example, quitting smoking. Okay. The science behind that is if you quit cold turkey and just stop smoking, and you do some sort of purification in your system, the nicotine will stay in your body for maybe 3 days, 7 days at most, if you're a chronic smoker. Okay. Well, most people will still have a problem stopping smoking after that process. Why is that? Well, it's because they've got a current learned conditioned behavioral response, whether they realize it or not, to pick up and light a cigarette and smoke it. And you can watch this in smokers. A lot of times they will be smoking a cigarette and while talking to you, and actually go in the pack and pull out another one and get ready to light it, and then stop themselves and they're like, oh, I didn't realize I already had one in my mouth, and they're smoking it. It's because they're not paying attention to what they're doing. So one of the things that is done, for example, is once you purify yourself, you can wear a rubber band. Okay. And every time after the purification, that nicotine, every time you get the urge to pick up a cigarette and you catch yourself, you pull that rubber band and you smack it against your wrist, and it hurts. It hurts a lot. Okay. And then you don't smoke. And every time you get the urge, pull that rubber band and you hit yourself. And at the end of 30 days, I'm pretty sure that you're pulling this rubber band all the way out to like outer space to let that sucker go. And it hurts. But after that, what'll end up happening is you have trained your body to have a negative response to the urge to smoke. So after that behavioral modification period, what will happen is whenever somebody offers you a cigarette or to smoke, or if you get the urge, your brain will automatically go, that's bad, that hurts, don't do that. Because that's the reptile part of your brain kicking in, because you conditioned that negative behavior and response and feelings to that. And remember, we make 80 to 90% of our decisions with our brain, our reptilian side of our brain. So you want the reptile to go, smoking bad, hurt, don't do that. And then you end up conditioning yourself. Other things you can do is breath control. That's important. Being able to recognize whenever you are in a heightened emotional state. Whenever people are in a heightened emotional states, their number of breaths per minute goes way, way up. And that's because whenever we're in a heightened emotional state, we needed the blood to pump to all of our muscles so that way we could run faster and get escape, right? Slow it down, slow your breath down, right? And think about that is okay, I'm angry. What am I going to do with that? And notice how my tone of voice just changed. Is you're telling yourself, okay, I'm angry. That's okay. Let's slow it down. Let's think about it. And whether you actually break down into all of the other stuff or the diagnosis of why you're angry, that simple act of what I just did is generally enough to take the edge off of the anger. So that way it becomes a little bit more manageable.
It is fascinating. Really cool example with the wristband. It's something that I think very easy to implement. You could write something on the wristband like "stop smoking," and every time you see the urge, you have this visual cue, and then you have the sensory cues, kinesthetic cues as a slap on your wrist to get you out of the state of craving, because now you're focusing on the pain. So you're changing your focus by introducing certain amount of pain in your body. That is actually interesting. Coming back to the example of kid kicking you, at the back of the seat, and you getting riled up about this. It seems to me kind of connected to the situation with the wristband. Like, imagine you sitting down, you want to have peace and quiet. You don't want to smoke. You just like on the airplane, you just want to have a peaceful experience without this extra factors of smoking or a kid hitting you at the back. How would you connect this to a wristband hitting you on the wrist and the kid hitting you behind? Because that's the physical stimuli that propels you towards the emotional state of, oh my God, I need to relieve this, right? So isn't it the case then with the smoking, like you keep hitting yourself, but yet it is connected to your behavior of smoking, and then you keep coming back to the smoking, and that's kind of you feeling this resistance. You're kind of in resistance phase, and that's kind of a behavior modification techniques that I think could be very successful for some. But it seems also that a lot of people are going to have troubles with that.
Well, and that's one of the things too, is that whether you're doing a system of negotiation or NLP or anything of the sort, one of the things that humans do by and large is they always want to oversimplify things. They want to put people in a box. You're a Democrat, you're a Tory, you're a Republican, you're Black, you're Chinese, you're whatever. And by doing that, it comes with certain presuppositions and biases that you've preloaded into that. Now, that's one of the ways that your brain is trying to reduce the amount of stimuli to make things more manageable. The negative byproduct of that is that it is also associating things with the person that probably are not true. Okay, so what you've got to do then is recognize that your brain is doing that, and recognizing it is really important first, and then you can move on from there. And so one of the things I tell people is people are made up of thousands of different interests, wants, needs, desires, hobbies, the whole nine yards. It is grossly oversimplified to think that just because, like an example, and I have nothing but admiration for everybody, I'm just using an example. So let's say somebody automatically thinks that somebody from the South is a conservative Republican. The first image that you get in your head is some Southern redneck that doesn't speak English very well, has a large belt buckle, drives a truck, has multiple guns, and loves the military and all this other stuff, right? You get this picture in your head, and that's not accurate. I'm from the South. I know lots of people that do not fit that demographic, okay, that may vote a certain way or not. And what's interesting about that is, speaking of that, is they've actually found, doing surveys of the country, that most people are not red for Republican or blue for Democrat. Is actually everybody's pretty much purple. There's things from each different party that they kind of agree with and they kind of don't. And so what you got to do is realize is that, and this goes back to recognizing the behavior that you disapprove of, not oversimplifying and saying, telling yourself that person is a villain because of that behavior. And this is important. Or that you're a victim because they're doing that. That's not accurate at all. What you have to recognize is that behavior is something I disagree with. That does not necessarily make the person bad, or that behavior is not representative of the person as a whole. Like, for example, let's go back to the kid that's kicking your seat. Okay. Let's say he's like 8 years old. Well, what if that kid, when he's back home, may work with his mother to make food for the homeless, and the kid loves doing it. But you didn't know that because he's kicking your seat. You're focused on him kicking your seat, right? And the kid in any other environment may be a wonderful person that's very altruistic and wants to help out people, but you're stuck on, this little snot is kicking my seat. See what I did there? I automatically went, okay, now this kid is right, and I have added presuppositions and biases, the whole 9 yards. And so now I went from, this is a child of multiple parts, that some may be good and something may be bad, is this little evil snot-nosed kid is, and I have added this whole new story to this kid. It's probably not true, right? And so one of the things you've got to recognize is, in this particular scenario, is one, you got to slow it down. Two, you got to recognize you're angry. Three, you got to identify the reason for the anger. And then four, once you're in a calm state and you slowed it down, think of what's the appropriate response. In this particular instance, you've got two major responses, assuming there's no other stimuli. You could either A, let this kid kick the back of your seat for the entire plane ride, and at which point your anger is going to rise up and you're probably going to yell at the child, because any decent human being is only going to put up with so much. Or B, you can recognize this is a problem, and then if you continue to let it go on, it's going to be a much larger problem. So while you're calm, and it's a small problem now, it's better to address it in a rational, calm tone and diffuse it now while everybody is calm. See?
Absolutely. I mean, it seems to me that you're describing the concept of perspective. You have to broaden your perspective, not to fall into the trap of biases, your own biases of thinking, oh, this is what it is, I'm 100% certain with, and this is how I'm going to react to this situation. But rather recognizing that this is one point of view and there is other angles to look at it. And it's your job to explore it, not only within yourself, by slowing down, by becoming aware of what's happening within you, and then trying to identify what is happening in the outside world. So becoming curious again, how can you turn it around? How can you alleviate the pain? How can you come to some sort of a solution? And, broadening the perspective, it's a really important things. And that's why we're having these conversations, to see another perspective, another angle on things, to broaden our horizons, to see things from another point of view. And a lot of people, that's kind of brings us to the topic of growth mindset and what Carol Dweck refers to as fixed mindset. Are you familiar with these concepts, and how do you understand growth mindsets and fixed mindset?
So, for example, we were talking at the beginning of this about my accomplishments and my things. And the only reason I was able to do that is I live by a phrase. And that phrase has actually been recently recoined by Jordan Peterson. It's in his 12 Rules for Life. And it says, always assume.
Great book, by the way.
I love the book. Yeah. Always assume whoever you're talking with has something to teach you. And it doesn't matter what their age or what's going on, they've always got something that you can learn from them. And I can tell you from example, I'm rather good at chess, was nationally ranked for a while. And I have gotten my teeth kicked in by an 8-year-old kid that played Game Boy while he did it. All right. And so I could either be angry at that, or I could stop and go, hey, I really appreciate that you were able to stomp my butt in the ground and not actually pay attention to the board. Could you show me how you did that? And that way I can become better and I can learn. And I always assume whatever situation I'm in is that there is something of value that this person has that I can get from that. And so you start with that. But once again, back to your other point too, is you brought up as well about this, the rubber band technique may not work. Okay. And this is something else that I want to really include people in too. Whenever you're dealing with any of these systems or whatnot, the way I always look at it is nothing is 100% foolproof and it's always going to work. So you can't get dogmatic about any sort of system or whatnot. Basically, what you're doing is you are playing the percentages and increasing your odds that you'll have a better success. And once you look at it from that way, whenever it's like when Edison was working on the light bulb and he failed over 10,000 times and then they finally created it. And they go up to him and they go, well, you made it, but you failed at 10,000 times. It's like, no, I figured out 10,000 ways of not doing it, of how not to do it correctly. Right. And so, and I got all this data and now I did it correctly. And it's the same thing is that, like using a technique may not have worked, but I really like this thing too, is whenever I teach NLP to people, I always make this analogy that imagine yourself as a pond and imagine the other person as a pond and they're touching, but your water's still, right? Well, whenever you interact with that person, you're throwing a pebble in their pond and it's creating waves. Well, those waves are now coming to hit you. And whenever you react to that, now you're pushing back the waves and it's back and forth. So the simple act of how you interacted with that other person will affect their behavior, period. And then how you react to the reaction further enhances that. And so you have to be really cognizant of what you do and how you do it, especially if you want to grow, but also realize too that if you use something and it doesn't work, going back to the negative review, don't just get angry that it didn't work or dismiss it that it didn't work. Now you got data. Now you got something that you can evaluate and you can use to grow into a growth mindset and further yourself. So for example, back to your last question with the growth mindset or the fixed mindset, is a fixed mindset says there's only one way to do it and that's just how it is. The growth mindset says, I bet you there's multiple ways of doing this, maybe doing it better. So there's this old story of daughters watching her mother cook this ham, and she cuts the two ends of it off of it and puts it in the pan. The daughter asked the mother, why'd you do this? She's like, I don't know. My mom did it. So she goes and asks the grandmother, hey, grandma, why'd you cut the two ends off the ham and put it in the pan like that? And she goes, I don't know. Ask my mother, she's still alive. So she goes, great grandma, why do you cut up the two ends off of the ham whenever you cook it? She's like, well, I don't do that anymore. She's like, well, they did it because they said you did it. She's like, yeah, back when I was alive during the Depression, we had very small pans. So you had to cut the two ends of it off to fit it into the pan then. But we don't have that problem anymore. So I quit doing it. I don't understand why they're still doing it. And their reason for doing it is that fixed mindset of, oh, I've always done it that way. Instead of looking at the growth mindset of, oh, they did it because of this and we don't need to do that. See the difference? So that's the important, the variation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, growth mindset, it's all about learning. It's something that we must have when we in school time, when we go through the schools, when we're learning new things, and where the plasticity in our brain is so high that you absorb new information. And then at some point, it's just like example you gave with the swimming in a swimming pool, where your brother might have kicked you. Now you feel like you're drowning, and now this instilled inside of you this locked up sensations of drowning. And every time you experiencing water, that's in essence what you're experiencing, this constriction within yourself. And this kind of traumas happen in school, where we kind of lock up our mindset, where we lock up that we cannot do math, for example, or we cannot do drawing, or we cannot do this or that. And then kind of we're moving towards the fixed mindset. Well, now with the use of NLP and the use of there's so many great techniques available for us, backed up by science, actually, that you could move your fixed mindset in certain areas and expand it towards a growth mindset. And this will broaden your perspective. This will broaden your self-awareness, and in effect makes you a better person. And it's all about it. It's all about self-improvement, self-development. How can you expand your horizons?
Well, a great illustration of what you just brought up is you brought up school and about achieving this growth mindset. So one of the things, there was this psychology expert who was in Texas, and his name's Emerson, and I actually learned this in the book by Robert Cialdini called Persuasion. It covers this very, very well. Is schools actually approached him and said, we have a problem. That in high school, we've noticed we pull in several different ethnicities and races of different kids. And every time in school, they always fragment off and only hang with their own ethnicity and skin color. So the blacks and the Chinese and the whites and all that stuff. And they don't mingle well together, and they get into fights, and it creates a huge amount of problem, and the teachers can't focus on learning, and we don't know what to do. So Emerson took a look at this and he went, how do I get these kids into a growth mindset instead of what they're on in a fixed mindset? So the first thing is he had to recognize the problem. And what a lot of people didn't recognize the problem is school, high school, believe it or not, even though we look back on it and went, oh, that's nothing, is actually a very stressful environment. You've got all these chemicals pumping through your system. You're getting judged on everything from your shoe color to your aftershave. You've got all that you're just now figuring out dating, and you've got all this material you got to learn, and you figure out your place in society, and you're asked, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And my God, is it stressful. And then you take all these things that you're unfamiliar with and throw them in a pot. Of course, people are going to run to their tribes. It's silly that they wouldn't run to their tribes because they're going to look for what's familiar. So then he said, now that we've identified why they do this, we have to figure out a solution. So then he's like, what kind of profession out there gets people to overlook race, gender, sexuality, all that? And he went and did a lot of studies, and he found the active duty military was the best way to get rid of that. And he went and interviewed them. And he said, I noticed that you don't care that your platoon mate is a brother or a Mexican or whatever, and you don't care that he's white. And they all just kind of laugh. They're like, no, why? That's silly. Why would I ever worry about that? And he's like, things that you're finding comical is problems that we're having all that. And one guy sat him down and explained something. He said, let me explain something to you. We go out in the field every day, and we are in a life or death situation. And you know what? When those bullets are whizzing over my head and I've got to rely on him, I don't care what he does in the bedroom or what color his skin is. I want to go home. So I don't care. I want to go home, and he wants to go home too. So he's going to rely on me just as much. And we've learned to grow past all that. So then he went, a greater purpose. What a wonderful thing. So then he came back and he developed this technique called Jigsaw learning and implemented it in Texas with great, great success. And it actually ended up becoming used in the United States a lot. And the way it works is you go to a classroom, and he breaks up the classroom in groups of 6 or 8, and you mix ethnicities and interests and sexualities. And then what you do is you sit down with the group and you go, okay, you will say 8, for example. You 8 are all responsible for learning this higher purpose thing. And I'm going to break this up into 8 parts. Each one of you are responsible for your part. Now, here's the problem. None of you will know that upper thing unless all of you do your jobs. So all of you need each other now. Now, here's the thing. You're not being graded on what you do. You're graded on your knowledge of that upper thing. Bye. And now it's, oh, now I need you. Now I want you. Now all that other nonsense just kind of floats all aside because I need you now. And they found that implementing Jigsaw learning gets rid of a lot of the biases and presuppositions. And now people start to understand that there are multiple parts to people. Now they're like, oh, I didn't know Bob was interested in opera. I didn't know Jane loved basketball. I didn't know. And they found this out because they actually needed them and dropped their guard and started learning about them and cooperating with them because they had to. And by creating a larger purpose and understanding that these are people that you need and treating them as humans, they were able to overcome a lot. It's been amazing, amazing study and amazing technique.
Oh, fascinating. What comes to me is another experiment, social experiment that they've done. I think it's called Marshmallow experiment, where they took three groups of people. I think it was three groups of people. And forgive me if I'm mixing it up, but I'm gonna relay the idea. Main idea is that the experiment is they took the bunch of marshmallows and spaghettis, and the goal was to build this tower, as tall tower as possible from these materials. So they took three groups of people. One group was like kindergartners, the other one was lawyers, and third type was engineers. And there was a time limit imposed on this game. And if you were to guess who would have won, is it engineers, lawyers, or kids? Their job were to negotiate the task and come up with creative solutions to build this little tower. Well, rationally, you would think the engineers would probably win this, since they have an expertise in the field. Then lawyers, because apparently they would be able to negotiate and come up with the solutions, how they can build it together, given the constrictions. But actually, it's the kids who won. And what they realized when they come back to the recording of how it was done, kids were never negotiating things. They were just trying things out together. There were almost no verbal communications happenings. Like, one kid is taking spaghetti, putting marshmallows, and the other one is like, oh, let's try this. And, they just doing through experimentations, which just gives, it poses the questions, how much of an ego we bring to the table, how much is actually distracts us from making a problem, even within the group, how much of ego everyone's bring to the table, how much you have to dismantle and clear it out before you can actually engage in the productive task.
Great.
It's go ahead.
I was going to say it's interesting because the kids, since they're not bringing all of that baggage, instead of having one mind, it's like you've got several minds working on the same topic. Whereas in the other environments, they're bringing all this baggage, and because they're not cooperating, they're not getting the benefit of the collaboration. Now there's posturing. Now there's hierarchy. Now there's, oh, well, my idea is better than yours, and blah, 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 blah. Where the kids are just like you said, just trying. Oh, well, what do you think about this? Well, cool. Well, that worked. Let's try this. And there's not any of, well, your idea sucks, my ideas. They don't care because they're like, we got to figure this out. Let's try this and cooperate together, which is honestly how most tasks, especially in the workplace, should be. You should be able to feel open to discuss what's going on and work as a group collaboratively to make your life and your business better. And in an ideal world, that's where we should all be. But people get fixated on the baggage and not the greater purpose. That's the problem.
Absolutely. It seems to me that the state of collaboration is the most productive state you could be in within a group or within yourself. And it all starts here. Like, you have to collaborate with yourself first. You have to remove your own ego, your own resistance to what's happening in front of you, where, like you said, the hierarchy is kind of in effect. You kind of trying to find out, how do you fit in this environment? How do you fit within this group? Who's a leader? Who's not a leader? Am I going to challenge them as a leader? So all of this dynamic that's introduced, it moves you away from collaboration, moves you away from being productive, and actually derails everyone when it comes to the productive things. Doing something that's benefits organization, doing something that moves everyone forward. Now, David, I know you're an NLP coach, and you teach people NLP and this communication techniques, becoming more aware, and you give us fantastic tips today on how to actually, becoming more self-aware of the dynamics that's happening within you, how to slow down, how to engage certain processes within you to help you overcome this difficult situation that you're facing. Now, Can you tell us a little bit more about your NLP course, NLP teachings? How do people find you? What's in line?
Sure.
What's in store for you?
So one of the things about NLP and why I've came up with this is I've been studying NLP for a very long time, and it's given me a lot of uses. For example, uh, whenever you go through, like, first I read Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence, and that way I could better identify my emotions and my counterparts because I wanted to get better at negotiation. And if you can't identify emotions, then how are you going to be able to negotiate, right? Because there's all this data that you're leaving on the table. And then I read this book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And in that one, you actually take a test. It's not a book that you read cover to cover. You take a test and it gives you 3 things to work on and it tells you what pages they're on. And you go through and do that. And then, like, say 60 days later, you retake the test again. Hopefully you improve. It gives you 3 more things. And one of these things in it is it really made me focus on one of the things that's missing out in a lot of these negotiation methods and tactics and study is they don't focus on my example of the 2 pawns. They don't really focus on, they might focus on you managing your emotions, but they don't focus on really managing the other person's emotions, or they kind of do in part, but they don't really realize this larger breadth of knowledge. Like, for example, an example that Voss uses is he says, like, the other person makes an offer and you reply with, you're being very generous. Well, and Robert Cialdini talks about that too, is that you're preloading a behavior in their mind that they have to live up to. Well, part of that's NLP, but that's where it stops. And the thing with learning having a better understanding of NLP is it allows you to get a better and deeper understanding of not only yourself, but the other person. So, for example, let's go back to deal with the causes of the behavior you disagree with, right? It allows you to, Sun Tzu always said, you need to know your enemy better than you know yourself, and you'll never lose. Well, these techniques allow you to get a better understanding of who you're negotiating with, of why they do things, what's the cause behind them. And once you get a more comprehensive understanding of who they are, why they're doing it, and what's going on, and you're able to recognize your own emotions and your own biases and your own reasoning behind stuff, you bring this massive ability that you can load on top of whatever school of thought with negotiation that you're using, that will bring you to a whole nother depth that's just not out there. So these tools are not to replace whatever school of thought that you got with being a negotiator. It is to supplement and enhance whatever school of thought, whether it's Jim Can't Start With Now or Chris Voss has Never Split the Difference, or Mukin's The Difficult Conversations or Crucial Conversations, or whatever it is could you imagine, before you go to negotiate, that you're handed a paper that says, oh, this guy or this girl, here is everything about them and why they do this, and their beliefs and premises and all that stuff, and here you go. By the way, you're going to negotiate this. Could you imagine how easier it is to work with them now that you know more about them and have a more comprehensive understanding of them? And I'm like, this is valuable, that people should really understand this, not from a mythical or new age perspective, but in a business negotiation perspective, to supplement that and make everybody better, not only better people, but better negotiators as well. Because if you are able to understand why people are doing things, to manage your emotion and theirs, to get a better understanding, and that understanding also allows you to not only have more curiosity, but be more empathetic. And I don't mean like tactical empathy. I mean, like actual empathy. If you understand where somebody's coming from, you are far more likely to relate to them. And so therefore you can get deeper and more long-term business relationships by employing these tools along with your other stuff that you're doing.
Wow, fantastic. So David, tell us how do people connect with you? How do people know, learn more about what is it that you do, your program, your coaching session, how to connect?
So what they need to do is find me on Twitter, which is at Tindell Tech, TINDELLTECH. Or you can find me on Facebook, look up Tindell Tech, and as a business, and I should come up. I anticipate to do it sometime next month. I'm still working with getting all the materials together, but that's what it's looking like. And by following me there, I will announce the days and all that stuff, and how you can sign up. And this initial course, somebody offering at a introductory rate, because I want people not only to get access to it, but I want their feedback and their testimonials, because just like we talked about with the negative reviews and the positive reviews, is I want information. I want data just as much as they do. So I want to be able to learn from them just as much as they are from me. And so I think it'll be a really good collaborative experience. The course will be 2 hours a day for 5 days in a row. You'll be able to watch the recordings for 30 days out. You'll get downloadable PDFs and study guides and all that stuff. It'll be an hour and a half of instruction with 30 minutes of Q&A each day. And there will also be things that I'll give you to allow you to practice, where you can go from there. Because at the end of this, I don't want you to just go, oh, I took NLP for a week, I guess I'm done. No. What I'm a firm believer of is I want to help you enter that growth mindset. So what I want you to do is, when you're done with this, is now I want you hungry. Now I want you to learn. And I want to be able to give you the tools of, this is how you continue your journey. And so that's what I would do at the end of it.
Sounds really cool. It sounds like that's something everyone could benefit from. And before we jump off, David, one last question. What is the craziest thing you've seen in the business?
Craziest thing I've seen in business. I'll tell you the thing that surprised me the most. And it's not really it is unusual to me. So I went out to, let me back up. So I grew up dirt poor, like food stamps. The government actually mailed us boxes of cheese that I used to love to eat. If they offered government cheese, I'd still eat it. Love that stuff. Now, so I grew up on grilled cheese sandwiches and really bad Kool-Aid, and that's just the way it was, right? Now, I go to a business training thing out in California, and they have this after hours party thing where they've got this tent, and they've got like loads of beer and on ice and everything. And for food, they offer gourmet grilled cheese. And I'm sitting there going, gourmet grilled cheese? What? This is just some California thing where, oh, the poor people eat grilled cheese, so therefore we're going to offer gourmet because we don't normally eat that stuff. And I'm just sitting there like, this is ridiculous. But then I go get in line, right? And I got to tell you, they do have gourmet grilled cheese. What they do is they had this chef right there, and they get 2 pieces of Texas toast and just soak the suckers in butter. And they ask you, do you want steak or ham or whatever? What kind of cheeses do you want? And all this stuff. And they make this awesome grilled cheese in front of you. And I can eat a lot. I only ate 1 sandwich, because when you eat this, you tear it apart and the thing just melts as it does. And at that point, I was like, I was wrong. This is amazing gourmet grilled cheese. And so I learned a lot that day. So.
Well, let's wrap it up as this, David. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate this conversation. We covered a lot of fascinating things today. And you know, I hope to see you one more time. Sometimes in the
Absolutely.
future, we can discuss a little bit more. And
Sure.
would be cool to see your own NLP course and training,
Mm.
and what kind of feedback you'd be able to and results you'd be able to help people get.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed it. This has been great. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And I see you in the next video. Bye now.